Hey, everybody, it's Ed. Before we get started, I want to thank some new podcast supporters we have. Devin Viciano, Kent Vertrees, Norman Reeder, Jess Womack, Stefan Slingerland, and Caleb Rawson. Thanks so much to these 6 guys for signing up, and thanks to everybody else who signed up over the years. It really means a lot, and it's allowed me to really expand the podcast in ways that I would have never imagined when I started it almost 5 years ago. If you want to learn more about the options for support, you can go to mountainandprairie.com/support. Thanks a lot. Hey, this is Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation, or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guest today is Jason Gardner. Jason is a father, homesteader, leadership instructor, and regenerative agriculture devotee who lives with his family on a remote property in the mountains of northeastern Washington state. Jason's also a retired Navy SEAL Master Chief who spent nearly 30 years in the SEAL teams and is a recipient of the Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart, and numerous other awards. As you'll hear in our conversation, Jason applies the lessons learned from his years of service towards building a meaningful life for his family in the wilds of Washington, a life lived with purpose and intention, built on a deep respect for the land. If Jason sounds familiar, it's because he's the husband to Iris Gardner, who was a guest on this podcast just a few weeks ago. Given all the wisdom that Iris shared regarding parenting and intentional living, and how fondly she spoke of Jason as a father and a husband, I thought it'd be fun to have Jason join me for a conversation. It was fascinating to hear Jason discuss many of the same topics that Iris and I covered, as he provided a complementary perspective on subjects including parenting, marriage, and thriving as a family in such a remote, wild region of the West. This was an amazing conversation, and I can't thank Jason enough for taking the time to share his wisdom with me. We talked a lot about his military service, from his decision as a high schooler to join the Navy SEALs to his long and diverse career as a SEAL leader. We also talk about his lifelong love of wild, mountainous places and why he and Iris have chosen to raise their family in northeastern Washington. We talked about how to find purpose in work, no matter what your chosen career. We also talk about the idea of having a warrior's mentality and how he applies that idea to parenting and his current career as a leadership consultant. Jason explains the dichotomy of being an elite special forces operator while also being a gentle father and husband. And we also talk about regenerative agriculture, the many life lessons he's learned from training horses, influential music, his favorite books, the best advice he's ever received, and much more. There's so many insights and resources packed into this episode, so don't forget to reference the episode notes for a full list of topics and links to everything we discussed. And also, if you'd like more insights into Jason and Iris's life in Washington, you can check out their YouTube channel, which is great. I've linked to that in the notes. Thanks again to Jason, and I hope you enjoy. I was thinking with you, maybe the best way to start this out is kind of chronologically, because from listening to you on other podcasts and reading some of your stuff, I know that you did not grow up in this wild landscape of Eastern Washington like your badass wife Iris did. And so could you talk a little bit about where you grew up and kind of your early years?
Sure. So my father was a Marine, and what that meant was, we moved around, not a lot, but a fair amount. I was born in North Carolina. When I was 3 months old, parents moved to Spain, and then we lived in Spain for a bit, and then right before I turned 5, we moved back to California because my dad was stationed at the air station at El Toro, and then lived on in base housing on the air station there. Then after that, my parents bought a house in San Clemente, which is right on the beach, basically in between Camp Pendleton and the air station at El Toro. And the way my dad managed the rest of his career, which is kind of cool, is that he would get orders between the two bases, and then when he had orders to the East Coast and he couldn't wiggle out of them, he would volunteer for a year unaccompanied over in Okinawa, which is a hard fill And then they would give him his choice of orders after that. So he could kind of, he chunked it out like that. And he did 2 of those Okinawa deals over the course of me growing up, and that meant that they got to stay in that house. And I grew up on the beach in Southern California, but I love the ocean. It's not where my heart is. My heart is in forested mountains with wild rivers and creeks and wildlife, and not in urban anything. Cities are great. I'm not comfortable there. It's just this is something that I feel at my core.
Did you get experience with that as a kid? I mean, would y'all go on trips out to wild places, or was that something that you developed as an adult?
We'd go camping quite frequently as kids, and my parents had one of those awesome Volkswagen buses with the pop-up roof, and we would just go on these big road trips fairly often and camp out, and it was wonderful.
I promise you I won't hassle you with Navy SEAL questions the whole time, but I think there's some really good lessons to be learned from your career. And when did military service come into your view? I mean, obviously you're with your dad in, it was a big part of y'all's life, but had you always thought that you wanted to be in some form of the military, and when did SEALs, specifically become a goal?
I always knew that I was going to be in the military, and I was very torn because I love nature. I love the outdoors. Like when I was a little kid, I had like all these field guides, and I would go out and look at bugs and birds and everything. And so being a naturalist or being in some kind of life science like that was something that appealed to me. Mm-hmm. And I was really torn. And at 7, I just decided one day when we were riding a car, it was raining hard, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to do the military first, and then I would do that second. And that's the decision I made. I, in high school, was about to join the Marine Corps, mm-hmm. and because I wanted to be a Force Recon Marine, and my dad's like, hey, he was still active duty in the Marine Corps. He's like, they're not closed loop. You'll do that for a little while if you get in there, and then you're going to have to go to do something else in the Marine Corps. He goes, why don't you go to the SEAL teams? Mm-hmm. And I'd been exposed to the SEAL teams because I had a martial arts instructor in the style Kaji Kempo that I was taking, who was a SEAL in Vietnam. Oh, wow. My dad's like, why don't you go to the SEAL teams? Like, Instructor Turner was a SEAL. They're closed loop. If you make it in there, you can stay there for your whole career. And it was, really, really good advice that he gave me there. And so then as, at the time I played water polo, I swam, and I was a lifeguard at the beach. Mm-hmm. So as soon as I did a little research into what SEALs are, I'm like, oh yeah, this is for me. Absolutely. And then locked onto that. I mean, I locked onto it like a pit bull.
Nice.
My junior year of high school. And then I started, that's when I started doing taking cold showers, running down the beach in jungle boots at 4 a.m., doing everything I could to, simulate what I thought that the training was. And back in, there was no Discovery Channel specials that I could watch. So it was just all guesswork. There was one like TV documentary, but it wasn't much. So that's when I bit onto it, and I enlisted right out of high school, lifeguarded one summer after my senior year. And then when everyone went back to school or went off to college, I joined the Navy, and that's how that happened.
Did you have any friends that were like-minded that you were doing this with, or was this kind of a solo thing where you just got in your head you were going to do it and you were focused on that? I mean, how the mental fortitude that takes for a high schooler to go off and do that sort of thing. I mean, I'm just talking from my own experience of being a bit of a slob. I mean, was there a crew of like-minded guys that got you in this hardcore mindset? I mean, maybe not. Maybe they weren't interested in military, but just this kind of focused hardcore that allowed you to even consider something like that when you're in high school.
It was just me.
That's badass, man.
I wanted to get out. I wanted to get out of my parents' house, and that's why I didn't opt to go to college. I thought about college, but then I was like, this. In my mind, it was going to be a 4-year extension of my childhood. Mm-hmm. I needed to get out and have my adventure. I wanted to go out, into fantasy novels and stuff like that, and they're all based around these huge adventures. And I'm like, this is how I'm going to have my epic journey. So that's what I did.
That's awesome. And I've heard you talk before about hardcore music, and that was a big part of kind of framing your mindset. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, I really, really enjoyed punk rock because there was just I loved going to, the punk shows, and there's a big mosh pit in there, and it's a way to just exercise like so much frustration and everything, and just get all of that stuff out, kind of in a positive way too, because when you're in a mosh pit, you're not trying to hurt people, but someone falls down, you pick them up. But it's a great way to exercise that, just I don't know what that is, that thing inside of me, that thing inside of me that makes my goosebumps, hair stand on end when a firefight kicks off and I run toward it instead of away from it. And so that love of the hardcore scene was just another thing that was drawing. I get drawn to the point of friction. And the point of friction is a term that we use in the military a lot about wherever the problem is, wherever the fight is. And I like a moth to a light, Later on, I kind of evolved. Like my senior year, a guy kind of turned me on to like Metallica. So I was very just like, hey, punk rock, that's it. I'm listening to the Dead Kennedys, to the Cro-Mags, to Minor Threat, to bands like Uniform Choice and Ill Repute, Stalag 13, all these bands that are in the hardcore scene in Southern California. And then he's like, hey, check out Metallica. And Metallica was this crossover that then opened up my mind to speed metal. And I was like, oh, boy, forget about it. I still really enjoy that music today. Yeah. It's just I've kind of transitioned into like a broad spectrum from everything from, your Norse folk music, bands like Danheim and Fawn and Wardruna, all the way to the speed metal but typically that kind of music is just, I'm listening to it when I'm working out.
I don't talk about music as much as I should on this podcast, and I've had people tell me I need to ask more about it because I'm generally not that, I don't have any musical talent, but I appreciate hearing that background. And one of the things I want to talk about with you, as we go through this is this. It seems like you operate on extremes because like there's some videos that you've put on Instagram of you like pumping up the platoon or your fellow SEALs before you're going on a mission, which is one of the most hardcore things I've seen. And then on the other side, there are these pictures of you with your kids being the most loving dad that anybody could imagine. And so I love that, those two ends of the spectrum. It's a dichotomy. Yeah, the dichotomy. That's what I was going to say. And I'm listening to Dichotomy of Leadership right now. So I was thinking about dichotomy, but it is. And you operate, I feel like you're such a great example of that. Can you talk about that? Sure.
I mean, going back to music really quick. Yeah. I love Slayer. And at the same time, I listen to a lot of country music. Yeah. Hated country music before because I hadn't ever heard any good country music until Iris played like a whole Chris Ledoux CD for me. Yeah. And I was like, oh, I love this. And then when I was deployed to Afghanistan on that deployment where, on Instagram, that's a video of my SEAL task unit. And like that 2009 deployment to Afghanistan was one of the most violent of my 5 combat deployments. Wow. I got nine deployments total. 5 combat deployments. That one was by far and away the craziest. And at the time, I was a SEAL task unit senior enlisted advisor, so I was in the second in command of a SEAL task unit. Typically, on deployment, the task unit senior enlisted advisor or commander don't get to go in the field because the whole task unit isn't out in the field. We did 23 operations on that deployment. The task unit commander and myself were out on 21 of them. Damn. And they were slugfest. Our longest firefight was 4 days long. Every time we got into helicopters, it was just about guaranteed when we got off we would be in a firefight. So one thing that we do before we go out on these operations, right? We'd always get together right before we got in the operation and do our gear inspections. So that's where we all look at each other to make sure we haven't forgotten anything. And then we'll do our comms checks to make sure our radios are all working. We're all good to go. And then we'll say a couple words. Sometimes somebody will say a prayer. Other times somebody will say something else. And that operation, I just got the boys fired up with like, hey, this is what we're going to do. And luckily, one of the guys filmed it. And I've had it forever and wanted to share it, but never did because I had everybody's faces were in it, you know?
Yeah.
So luckily, I have a friend. Well, Joel Canoop is a great video editor. He went through it and he blurred everyone's faces out so I could share it. And he also added subtitles. So, you know, that was super cool. But that was a really intense deployment. You know, I came back from that deployment and I had to work through a lot of issues. And that's where, you know, the dichotomy comes in. Luckily, I was humble enough when Iris told me that I wasn't the same person that left. And that would I go talk to a psych? I did. And so I called up the psych and started, you know, seeing the psychologist very regularly. I never had to take any antidepressant drugs or any anxiety medicine. Maybe it would have made sense for me. Actually, at the time I was probably over medicating with alcohol anyway. But here's the thing. It's that aspect from Slayer to country music. That's all me. And that aspect of warrior and good father, that's all me. And just because I'm a good warrior on the battlefield doesn't cancel me out from being a good father. And I could argue to folks that maybe it makes me a better father because of some of the things seen. I actually appreciate that my kids are in one piece. I have a huge responsibility to be that example for other folks that, you know, maybe there's a lot of young men and maybe some young women that are fired up when I put up, you know, pictures of gunfights and explosions, but also to show that, hey, this is what being an engaged dad looks like. And so it's super important to me when you think if you're going to think strategically, then you're thinking about the best way to raise your kids and every young person that you come in contact with. If you're just thinking tactically, then you're just worried about yourself. The strategic is the long game, and tactics is what's going on right now.
So I'm going to link in the episode notes to some other podcasts you've been on where you really go into a lot of really interesting detail about your career in the SEALs. And basically, correct me if I'm wrong, but nearly 30 years. I mean, you know, it was a stellar career. And so now that you're out of that, and looking back on it, which I'm sure is kind of crazy, if you could boil it down to a few things, like what were the keys to your success? Like, how did you manage to have such a successful career? Because all special forces guys are tough and they're these kind of stereotypical things that people think about. But what would you say made you so good at your job?
Imposter syndrome. I was terrified that any second someone was going to say, hey, wait a minute. What is Gardner doing here? And what that did is that kept me humble. In being humble, then you're like, okay, I've always got to improve. I don't know that I'm good enough. So that aspect of it. And then the other aspect of it was I was not afraid to recruit people to be around me that I felt like were smarter than me. So I don't have any issues with a subordinate outshining me or being smarter than me. So I always looked for people that were good to go. And then as I started to promote up, then I could recruit people and have them come to the teams, you know, at the team with me and basically surround myself as best I could. And I could do it enough that it made a difference with people that I thought were better than me. And what I looked for in people was character. So if I was looking at another SEAL and I'm like, this guy has got a solid character, I like the man that he is, that was good enough because typically how they performed as a SEAL was then fantastic.
One other question about your military career. How did you know it was time to retire? Because from my understanding, some friends of mine that have served, if you're in 20 years, then you can get out and you get great benefits. And that's kind of the threshold that a lot of people wait for. But you went beyond that. And what was that decision like, deciding to go beyond that 20 years? And then how did you know, all right, I've done enough of this. It's time to start a new chapter?
Okay, so you're kind of forced out around 30, which is right about the time that I got, I could get waivers and do more time, but it would have required me having to go overseas for like a year, and I wasn't willing to do that with the level that my family was. And they don't pay you enough, in my estimation, for the amount of hours that you're going to have to work at the level of working for an admiral or a general, which is what it would have taken for me to stay in longer. You guys don't pay enough money. Now, when I got to 20, right around the time I got to 20, there was this thing going on where the contractors were paying such good money to go work in Afghanistan or in Iraq that the military, SOF in general, was going to lose everybody. And they're like, okay, we got to figure out how to keep people in. So they came up with a bonus program where they were given a real hefty re-enlistment bonus.
Yeah.
And you could max it out by agreeing to go from 20 to 25. So I did that and took that huge bonus to do the extra 5 years. Because honestly, I enjoyed going to work. So I was like, yeah, why not? And you're going to give me this big bonus, which is what allowed Iris and I to buy the farm that we had out in eastern San Diego, because that bonus lined up perfectly with when the bubble burst on the real estate in 2009. Nice. So I was going to get at 25 years. I'm like, yeah, I'm out, because that was at a period of time where the deployment schedule was just ridiculous. They were, I think, they were deploying in SEAL teams for a whole year and that's not sustainable. They only did it I think for one deployment, and then they're like, this was a bad idea. Let's never do it again. And so I almost got out at 25, but then a retired Master Chief goes, hey, Jason, come here. And he showed me the retirement calculator. Here's what you get at 25 in retirement, and here's what you get if you stayed at 30. And I was like, oh. Took those numbers home. I showed them to Iris, and she's like, yeah, you're doing 30. We can do 5 years standing on our head. and here's the other deal. Luckily, the way my career had lined out, I had my Ops Master Chief, Command Master Chief of SEAL Team 5 coming up. And then after that, I was going to take over the training detachment, which were all awesome opportunities. Yeah. So I did that. But, when I hung it up, I was ready. I was done. Some folks say when they clean out their locker, they're a little bit sad. Not me at that point. And I've talked to other guys that have done, 27, 30 years, and they had the same feelings. They're like, yeah, we were ready to go.
I think that's super important for people to hear, about the financial realities of that and the sacrifices that you and Iris decided to make because you wanted to have this life that you now have. Because Iris and I talked, I think we were talking after we recorded our podcast, and we were talking about how people will reach out and say, I want the life that y'all have. This is so cool. But I don't know that people fully appreciate all the hard work, not just hard work, but being apart from each other. And in your case, having your life on the line, like no other job. And so I think I appreciate you sharing that, because it's important for people to remember that the life that you guys have built for yourself is very intentional and was very hard to do. It doesn't just happen. So I think that's that's very instructive. Do you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we both drive older cars, and we live in a small cabin with one bathroom, all four of us. And that's, those are the sacrifices. We're going to build a bigger house, but those are the sacrifices we've made to live where we live, and have this lifestyle. And it's not for everybody. Can't go to choose from 5 different restaurants or 10 different restaurants to eat. And actually the town that's close to us, the sidewalks basically roll up at 6 p.m. Yeah. If we were to make the 45-minute drive to get there.
So can you talk a little bit about how your kind of approach to parenting? Because you're a little bit ahead of me with your youngest kids. I've got a 3 and a 5-year-old, almost 3 and a 5-year-old. And so I'm always talking to people that I admire as parents to try to learn from them. And so how was your life? How was your approach to parenting different now that you're retired? Because I would imagine, you were you would have to go off on deployment for a while and then come back. And that takes a different approach than what you have now. And especially during this pandemic where you're there, the majority of the time. So how was that transition?
So, I'm going to take an overall umbrella as my general approach to parenting.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tie it back to the SEAL teams because that's all I know how to do. So when we do a target assault, we tell the guys, look for work. So as a dad, I look for work. What does that mean? That means that I try to take on everything that I can do as a father. So I'm changing diapers. I'm swaddling the kids. I'm doing everything. The only thing I can't do is breastfeed.
Yeah.
That's it. And as soon as those kids are weaned, I can help out with everything else, and I need to. That's how I look at it. Our end state for raising our kids is, and this is, again, being goal-oriented and thinking, tactically and all that, is we want to raise kind, confident, competent adults. That's where we're trying to get with raising our kids. And so all the decisions I make as a father are nested in getting to that goal. And a lot of it is being aware that my kids are watching how I act, and they're going to take more from how they see me behave than what I tell them to do. So keeping that in the back of my mind, the little voice that the little eyes are always watching me is super important. And when I talk about other people, when I interact with people in public, and things that I say and how Iris and I treat each other, all of those things, that's all that you're parenting 100% of the time that your kids have got your eyes on you, and you have to be aware of that. The other thing is I need to teach my kids how to overcome all those obstacles that life's going to throw at them. I can't solve their problems. And so I try and make a real conscious effort to do that, to let them fail. Now, I'm not going to allow some catastrophic failure like, hey, kid, here, go play with a chainsaw, or let them go out into the street without looking both ways. But I am, if Storm climbs up into an apple tree and she decides that she can't get down and starts crying and, of course, as her father, I want to go rescue her and be her white knight, but I'm not going to make her a competent adult by doing that. So what can I do? Okay, well, I can coach her down. I'm not just going to leave her in the tree. I can go over to the tree and, hey, I'm not going to get you down. You can get yourself down. Put your hand here and move your foot over there and get down. So teaching them how to navigate obstacles is how to do it. I got to get them ready for the world. I'm not getting the world ready for them.
One of the things I love that I saw that you put on social media that I actually did a screenshot of it, and I look at it a lot, is a thing you wrote out called To My Daughter, where it's kind of these points of how you want to raise your daughter. And I mean, it's really insightful stuff. And I think it speaks to you and Iris's, how intentional you are about things. I mean, you went through the process of thinking about this and then writing it out and then sharing it with the world, which I think is a whole different step that I greatly appreciate. But how long did it take you, and I'll link to that so people can see it, but how long did it take you to come up with that To My Daughter post or those points about how you want to raise your daughter? I mean, was that something that you figured out early on when she was, 2 years old, or did it take you a while to kind of really think about it and think about where you wanted her to go or your hopes for her as a human?
So I've been frustrated with the example. I feel like I don't think I'd ever seen men talk about how they want it, specifically how they want to raise their daughters, other than, the weird discussions guys have got, and I have no idea what to make of it, is like, oh, when she's 16 years old and guys come over to date, I'm going to be cleaning a rifle in the living room, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. I've always thought it was dumb, and it's, you don't solve problems by intimidating people. You solve them by developing relationships with them. And so it was something I'd been turning over in my head for a long time, but I'm not a super smart guy, so when I was on active duty, I just didn't have the bandwidth to really think about it. I came up with that after I'd retired, and I really started to think about no one else is taught. There's lots of good opinions out there and advice on how to raise sons, but there's nothing that I'd seen that was really meaningful to me about raising a daughter and the kind of daughter that I wanted to raise, and the kind of woman that I always found attractive anyway was one that was more competent and could be out there doing things. So that was my end state, and it was over the course of about 6 months that I was turning it over in my head, and I was listening to things that Jocko said, and I was listening to things that Jordan Peterson said, and looking at stuff that Marcus Aurelius had written about, in his meditations. And I was like, okay, I'm ready. I consolidated it into what you talking about, that letter that's basically my philosophy on raising her. Then Iris chopped it, and then I put it out there and was able to share it, like on Jocko podcast and some other podcasts, and we have it on a poster and everything. And I think it's good, positive things, and it's a good thing to get out there. A lot of men like yourselves have just said, like, this is awesome. I've been looking for something like this, so I appreciate it that it resonated with you.
Yeah, well, I've never seen anything like it, and I spend so much time thinking about raising girls. I mean, because that's what I have, and I wouldn't have it any other way. But it's interesting because when before I had kids, I just kind of assumed that I would have boys, and it's not like I wanted boys or I had some, that was my desire. But I remember when we got the test, 20 weeks or whatever for our first one, and it was a girl, and I was just kind of like, wait, what? Because my whole life has been all guys. I went to all guys high school. I feel like everything I've done has just in one way or the other been almost 100% guys. And so it's been quite a change for me to really figure this out and figure it out in a way that I can understand. And this thing is, I really feel like it's perfect. There's one thing that we were talking about before we started recording when we decided, we need to start recording because we're missing the good stuff. There's this part where you say, I do not intend to raise a princess, but rather a warrior with fire in her heart and ice in her veins. And we were talking about when people are not really focused in on what you're doing and what elite military people do, they think that there's this kind of overly tough guy stuff and macho type stuff. Like being a warrior is like being a loudmouth or being, fighting and that kind of thing. Whereas it's actually the exact opposite. And I think you're a perfect example of that. Can you talk about being a warrior and kind of the humility and what being a warrior means to you for yourself and for your daughter?
Yeah, it means that I am completely able to set aside discomfort to get the right thing done. And so whatever that discomfort might be, most of it's physical. Sometimes it might be having the moral courage to say or do the right thing, even though it isn't popular. And it might be that, I'm hanging around with a group of friends and somebody says something derogatory about somebody else, being brave enough to go, hey, you know what? That's not cool. Let's not talk that way. Yeah. And I have been the person who is saying, derogatory comments about people or making fun of people. And the thing that changed me is somebody else, usually, for a lot of it was Iris, is just saying, hey, that's really not cool. You shouldn't talk like that. Mm-hmm. And it was stuff I was saying without even thinking about it, right? And then when I thought about it, I was like, there's no way I can justify that as being good or cool or positive in any light. So, that's what the warrior doesn't need a battlefield.
Sure.
The warrior is the one that can be uncomfortable and shoulder that discomfort to do the right thing.
That's such wise words that I think everybody needs. I need to listen to it as much as anybody. And one thing you said there that struck a chord with me, because it's the same thing with my wife, is how much better she makes me. And, the typical testosterone fueled mouthing off that guys like me do every now and then. She's the first one to check it. And I feel like I've become such a better person because of her. And so I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on your marriage with Iris, because that podcast I did with her a few weeks ago was just, it got so much unbelievable feedback, which is no surprise.
Yeah.
But you're obviously very strong-willed, very tough. You do your own thing. I mean, since high school, you've had this independent streak. You're going to do what you need to do. And Iris is the same way. And so how have y'all how does this marriage work between two strong-willed people who could very easily operate independently and kick a lot of ass? But how do you guys think about this team that you form?
Mutual respect and, open communications. And I'm not great at communicating, and Iris is much better than I am, but we have lots of great discussions about ideas, and we don't talk about things so much, but ideas and broader topics. And so that's really helped us grow. And what else has really helped us grow? I'll tell you, the podcasts, us being able to, instead of me listening to talk radio on my hour-long commute into San Diego when we lived back there, or even, and that's when we first were exposed to podcasts, but we could listen to these long-form discussions about different ideas. And then what it's really great about is it forces you to be introspective and how can I improve? And so we've been on this trajectory where we've been growing together. And a lot of that is just, I just love her to death. And if you talk to my parents, or, Jocko will tell you that she's the absolutely the best thing that ever happened to me, because I was just kind of floundering around in my life. And then when we became a couple, my military career, I was just kind of floundering around, and then I just skyrocketed across the board. And I think she feels the same way, but yeah, we're really good for each other, and it's based on that mutual respect and the open, honest conversations that we have. And a lot of it too is we have a lot of the same interests, and that's when I first met Iris, and I thought she was absolutely gorgeous, but when I talked to her about things, I was every time we talked, I discovered a new interest that we had in common, with the love of the outdoors, the love of gardening, horses, I've always loved horses. I was around them a lot when I was a kid because my mom grew up on a farm and we rode, and then it was something I came back to later. But there were just all these things where we were inside the same box with our interests and the type of people that we are.
That's one thing I wanted to talk to you about, and you teed it up perfectly, the horses, because again, I feel like a weirdo because I'm watching you on social media. I feel like I know all this stuff about you. And this is the first time we talk, but it sounds like you're really getting into the horse training and horse wrangling. And I'm curious just about that in general and how that's gone, but then also what you've learned about yourself through these horses. Because I'm not a big horse person. I don't understand them. I just haven't had much time around them. But everybody I know who does, they say that they, through the process of spending time with horses, they learn more about themselves than they do about horses. And can you talk about that?
Horses and dogs.
Yeah.
Right? The two of them have kind of evolved along with us as human beings. And there's a bond that you will share with the horses is the same that you'll share with the dog. And the horses, I think you would really enjoy it because they're a way to really get into the wilderness. And when you're on a horse's back, you see a lot more of nature.
Sure.
For whatever reason, all the animals just go, oh, that's just a horse, or it's, a four-legged critter over there. It's not a person. And you get to actually be immersed in it a little bit more. So it's one of those things that Iris enjoys. I like it. My grandfather, who on my mom's side, who immigrated from Germany, he grew up on a horse farm in Germany. And so I guess it's kind of in my DNA, and it feels like it because I'm pulled to the horses from somewhere really deep inside of me. But, I did, Greg Ellil is a horse trainer, and I did his clinic up here recently. And one of the things that he teaches is he's like, hey, the horse is a mirror. If the horse is doing something wrong, it's not the horse, it's you. And so when you keep that in mind, you're like, if you keep in mind that the horse is wants to do the best he can, because that's how they're hardwired in a herd mentality, then if the horse isn't doing it, then you're not communicating with the horse directly. And so you're forced to take ownership of everything that you're doing. This applies to parenting too.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking.
If my kids are misbehaving, like every time that I've had to use a consequence, i.e. punishing my kids because they did the wrong thing, when I really study what happened and back up the clock, there was something I was lazy about an hour prior or 2 hours prior where I could have headed it off and, communicated better with my kids or been involved to where I wouldn't have had to actually apply these consequences.
Do you see the same? Is it the same in military leadership as well? Like if somebody that reports to you, if you had to punish them, could you make that same kind of line of thinking?
For the most part.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's 90% of the time.
Sure.
Someone goes out and gets a DUI. I don't know, short of trying to figure out what demons they have that they're self-medicating with the alcohol that they wind up getting the DNA is, and there's not enough time for that with all the people that you're leading.
Sure.
But for the most part, if you're careful and you're checking and you're communicating, you can head off a lot of the disciplinary issues ahead of time. And in the military, it's like a kind of a broken window policy. So we figure like, hey, if you're doing all the small things, right? Like if you're walking around and you got a squared away haircut and your uniform's good and you're doing all these other things, then you're probably not, and I say probably because everyone can find an exception to it, going to do something wrong that's really big, and they look at that attitude with fighting crime, like clean up all the little crimes and hopefully a lot of the big crimes go away. Back to the horses though. It's really exciting to learn something new. It's really good for your brain. And so that aspect of it is super enjoyable. My horse, Fenrir, he's a Norwegian fjord. He's 8 years old. He's a great horse. And I can't tell you the feeling of accomplishment that I get when I work through an issue and I see that it's like, okay, and every time I'm doing something wrong. And recently, I was having a hard time getting his halter on him, pulling his head away. And a buddy of mine, Danny DeFranco, was over visiting. And he's like, hey, you need to practice first with him, just teaching him to put his head down when you come over to him. And so I took a step back, broke it down to the fundamentals, taught him to put his head down, and now got the halter squared away so I just wasn't a spaghetti mess of ropes everywhere.
Yeah.
And had it squared away when I walked up to him. And now I walk right up to him, put my head over his neck. He drops his head, throw the halter on him. He holds his head while I tie a knot, and we're good to go. I love it. When he and I step out on a ride and his ears are forward and gosh, I'm going to get emotional and cry a little bit here on you. But he's excited to be out in the woods. He's excited as I am. Yeah. And that's just great. To share that bond with another person, another animal, those are things that help us, be better. Yeah. And feel better.
I'm with you. It's in our DNA. I mean, I think you're right about horses, and you're right about dogs. I mean, we've come up together through through evolution, and there's this bond that is hard to understand. So, you're obviously just so passionate about everything you do, and that word is overused. I mean, you're focused, you have purpose in what you do, and it's you have since high school. You've had this ability to get zoned in, and you've said it comes and goes in different waves and different levels of intensity over time. But I mean, from my perspective, you're living life with purpose, and you hear a lot about people who may leave the military, or even just people who have regular jobs and they don't feel fulfilled, or they don't feel like it matters. And, you're in leadership consulting, you're talking to a lot of these people at these companies and trying to help them be the best version of themselves for their companies. And so, what would be your advice to somebody, whether it's somebody, who recently retired from the military, or Say somebody I get emails all the time from people who have jobs they're not fulfilled with and they think it doesn't matter. So like, what would you tell somebody? Like, how do you do this? I mean, how can you find purpose without being a Navy SEAL or without, having this homestead out in the wilderness? I mean, what's your advice?
So I'm going to tell you about a thing that we do in sniper training called the stalk. In sniper training, most guys that fail, it's always because they failed stalking. You can teach anyone how to shoot. So what a stalk is it simulates two snipers, an actual sniper duel where you're going up against another sniper. It's the most difficult thing that you can do. They take you out into a field, lay you down. You're all laid down in your ghillie suits, and the instructors are standing up, and they'll like point over, hey, you see that pine tree over there on your right? Yep, that's your right limit. You see that telephone pole, 700 yards over there on your left? That's your left limit. The observation point is that way, and that's all they tell you. Typically, the observation point is, and this is where the instructors are who are playing the enemy snipers, they're typically 1,200 yards away. The first thing that you have to do in a stalk is, before you get any closer, because the closer you get, the easier you are to spot, is figure out where they're at. So I'm going to tell this story, and then I'm going to transition it all and wrap it up for you, okay, and
Perfect.
tell you how this applies. So you got to find them. If you're doing it right, you're going to stay right where you're at and get some vegetation around you and just start scanning everything you can see. If you can't see the observation point, you're going to move a little bit laterally. You don't want to go any closer, and not go any closer until you find that observation point. Once you've found it, now you've established your goal. Now you're going to take some time and study how you're going to get there so that they won't see you. One of the things I like to do is pick out reference points around the observation point so that I could know, okay, they're right underneath the top of that oak tree, or they're to the left of that boulder, so that I could keep that reference point in sight, but not actually see the OP again. Because if I can see them, they can see me.
Yeah.
And then now I picked my route based on the terrain. Now I set off. As I'm going, I'm constantly adjusting my plan based on new developments. Get within 200 yards of the target, then I set up my final firing position, and I shoot. Here's what you do. You figure out what your purpose is. That's your goal. Then you're going to sit down and figure out how you're going to get to that goal, and you get to that goal one step at a time. And as you're moving towards the goal, you're constantly adjusting how you're getting there because things are changing. Your life situation is going to change. The market might change. Your finances might change. All these things are changing. And your target, it could be moving too. And so you're constantly adjusting and moving. So you're looking up and you're looking at what that long-term goal is, and then you take the next step. You look down and you take the next step. You take another step, and then you look up. You get that long-term goal. And that's what you need to do. People need to forget about being happy. People are like, oh, I want to be happy. Don't chase happiness. Find purpose. Mm-hmm. When you find a purpose, happiness will come after that. But that's absolutely what you need to have as a human being. If you're not finding that your job is fulfilling, then you need to take a look at it, right? So when I promoted out of the tactical levels of leadership, and that's when I was down there being a SEAL leader. My last tactical level leadership job was being that SEAL task unit senior enlisted advisor, and I was still going out in the field and doing the job with the guys. And after that, I promoted in the executive levels of leadership, where now I was in an office answering emails, going to meetings, and I was miserable for the first year. And it took me a little bit to find what's my purpose. And my purpose was I need to be able to represent those folks that are down there doing the job. I need to do a better job of representing them. Because, when you go up in those levels of leadership, like and now you're in the office and you're one of those guys, everyone has forgotten what it's like to be down there doing the job. So as I was going to meetings and stuff like that, I was like, well, wait a minute, you've all forgotten what it's really like down there. And that now I'm like, oh man, this is my purpose. I'm going to be that transition. I'm going to be that person that reminds everybody up in the lofty, like corporate headquarters at the SEAL teams, or in the Navy, because I'm at executive level leadership, what it's like to be the guy. And then the other side of that coin is I'm going down there to the guys and girls, because at the SEAL teams, while there aren't any female SEALs yet, we have lots of really awesome female support that are out there, in combat zones as well. And communicating to them like, hey, here's why we're making these decisions,
Yep.
And so there's real world constraints, and money is a big one. Time's another one. And communicating to them, hey, this is why these decisions are getting made. It just cleans everything up for everybody. But once I found my purpose, then I was able to lock onto it, and I was able to do that much better. What are some common purposes that people can look for? Well, hey, how about being a good parent? How about being a good neighbor? How about being a good member of your community? How about helping to protect and preserve this awesome world that we've been gifted to live in and make it a better place in a positive way? And, I'm not going to change anybody's minds by screaming at them. I'm going to change minds by having thoughtful conversations with folks, and that's how you get it done.
Tell me if I'm putting words in your mouth here, but I would say when you talk about that, for example, you shifted your mindset from it being all about you to how can I be of service to the people that are depending on me. When you started thinking about the guys, that you were serving by sending those emails, that you were helping out, it gave you purpose. And when you think about, like for me, when I start feeling sorry for myself or, being a wimp about something, if I think about, well, my kids need me for this, I need to do this for them, all of a sudden getting out of my own head and saying, how can I approach this with generosity for people I care about? And that seems to work for me. Was that a shift for you? I'm not putting words in your mouth, am I?
No, that's perfect.
Okay.
That's exactly, it's just slightly different, but finding that purpose. And that's the best example I could give to someone who's like, oh, I don't have any purpose in my job. Well, have you really looked at it? Mm-hmm. And then, here's the other thing. If you're miserable at your job, develop an exit strategy. So that's your goal. I'm doing this job. I don't like it. I would rather be doing that other job. Okay. That's your goal. Start taking steps toward it incrementally, and you're going to adjust your steps as you move towards that goal.
And while we're talking about jobs, can you talk a little bit about what you're doing now? I realize we hadn't even talked about that. Talk about your leadership coaching and the company you're with and all that, because I think I've gained a lot from everything you guys put out.
So I work for Echelon Front. It is a leadership consulting company. And when we talk about leadership, that goes all the way down to the person who is just leading themselves in any organization. And every problem that any organization has is a leadership problem. It's all leadership problems. So if you talk about how are we going to solve these problems, you're going to solve them through leadership, and you're going to solve them through taking ownership, which is, Jocko and Leif, the founders of our company, wrote the book Extreme Ownership. And it's about that, hey, you don't cast any blame. You don't make excuses. You look at how you can adjust to solve any given problem or situation. And that's really the only person that you can affect is you.
Mm-hmm. That extreme ownership concept, I read that book right when it came out, years ago now, and that was a perspective shift, like a foundational shift for me when you think about that. And it sounds kind of crazy at first glance, like you're responsible for everything, everything's your fault. But if that subtle shift, or maybe it's not subtle, it changed everything for me. I can't recommend that. I made a list of the 20 most influential books I've read in the last 10 years, and that had a very big spot on the list because I loved it. Is that something y'all would talk about in the SEAL teams?
Yeah. So, I got lucky because right when that book came out, right when I made that transition from tactical levels of leadership to executive levels of leadership.
Okay.
It was awesome because, I've known Jocko since 1993. I was at SEAL Team 3 with Jocko and Leif in 2000, but not in their task unit. I was in a different task unit. And so when that book came out, I gobbled it up right away on Audible. And then I started putting what they teach in that book into practice in real time and saw it work. Mm-hmm. It was so awesome. But yeah, that concept of extreme ownership, it's something that you actually have to think about all the time. We say it's simple, not easy.
Yeah, I think I'll link to that book in the notes. I can't recommend it enough. And it's, you don't have to even have any interest in the military to gain a lot from it. I've been telling everybody I work with they need to read it because I think it scares some people though, because when you take that approach, there's no more excuses, and it's scary.
Here's the first thing that people say: "This is awesome. You need to give my boss to read Extreme Ownership." Yeah. Or you need to get that team over there to take extreme ownership. And then it's like, okay.
Reread.
Yeah. But that's human nature. If you just, that there's that little resentment voice that's inside your head, and you just got to learn how to put a sock in its mouth and see how you can move forward.
Nah, it's great stuff. Everything you and the people you surround yourself with put out. I mean, I'm not trying to blow smoke here. It's 100% true and genuine, is that it's this perfect balance of toughness with humility, with compassion. It's something like I've never seen it before. And it's no surprise that it struck such a chord with so many people, because I read a lot and I'm always trying to get a little better, and I'm interested in personal development. But the way that you and Iris and then, your team at Echelon Front, I mean, it's a very effective and unique way of thinking about business, life, parenting, and I've gained a lot from it. So, man, I really appreciate everything you've done. I've got some quick questions because We're already at an hour, which I say this every time, but it's just crazy how fast these go. Can we run through a few of those real quick?
Absolutely. I've got time.
All right. Awesome. Books. I love books. I know your wife loves books. She's writing a book that I can't wait to read. What books have been important to you? And it could be about the American West, could be about leadership, just in general. Are there any authors or things you've read over the years that have impacted you?
There's a ton. Let's start out with kind of like the West.
Yeah.
Lonesome Dove.
I love it.
Gus McCrae. And actually, the interaction between Gus and Captain Call is just, it's such a great book, and there's so many good life lessons that you can take out of that I think it's fantastic. I think it's a kind of a must read, and it's so much more than just a great story about the West. There's another book that I don't know that you've ever heard of, but it's called Trees of Power, and it's by this guy, Akiva Silver. He talks about 10 different trees that he thinks are really cool, but what I really enjoyed about this book is I liked his thought and the way he approached environmentalism and conservation. And it's a really, really good book, and I recommend it highly. Dirt to Soil by Gabe Brown. You can't go wrong reading anything that Joel Salatin has written. And, I'm just looking up at I'm sitting right next to my bookshelf now. The Daily Stoic is up there. I really enjoy Stoicism, so I'll check that out once a day. And that's fantastic. Yeah.
Wait, talk about regenerative agriculture, because I know you're really interested in it. How did that enter into your brain? I mean, how did that come across your radar initially? Because those people you mentioned, I mean, they're right in the middle of it, and I kind of operate a little bit in that world. When did that become a part of your life?
Well, when we started doing our CSA farm,
okay,
when we bought our farm in San Diego and we're selling food to the community and stuff like that, that's when we discovered Joel Salatin, and then through that, this whole regenerative agriculture concepts and the concepts of permaculture and the concepts of just trying to mirror nature and everything you're doing, it made sense. And so that was something that's how we got exposed to it, and Joel Salatin was our gateway drug. And because he has just this fabulous way of taking really complex issues and then communicating them in a very down-to-earth, common sense manner that I enjoyed, and then it's just like, okay, I'm going to pull the string with YouTube videos and books. And that's when later, got exposed to Gabe Brown's Dirt to Soil and just all the other stuff that's out there. There's so many other people out there thinking about the same stuff and thinking about how to do things without just tilling everything up and spraying chemicals all over it.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I remember when I first kind of got it, I read a book called For the Love of Land by Jim Howell, who's been on this podcast twice. He's turned into a great friend of mine. But
okay, I'm writing that down.
Yeah, it's really, really good. I'll send you all a copy. You need a copy on that bookshelf. I'll send you one.
Okay.
I tell Jim he owes me some commission for all the books I'm selling for. But but I remember when I read it, and that was the first time I got it, just that if you do these things in nature's image, it just works. And that's how it's supposed to work. And all this other stuff we're doing is, we need technology and we need to feed the world. And I'm not saying that regenerative agriculture is the only way to do it. I work with a lot of traditional farmers, but it does just make sense. I don't know. It's one of those subjects that, like, I did the same thing. You just go down this rabbit hole, and the deeper you get, the more interesting it gets.
When you start to understand what's going on underground and how everything is interconnected and how important all the bacteria and microbes and fungi are to having good soil, that it's incredible. And you're right, like, technology is one of those things that helps us, now, unfortunately, like a no-till drill is an expensive piece of equipment. And hopefully at some point, the prices come down, that more and more people are using no-till practices that can just help us with all the erosion and everything else that we've got going on.
No, I'm glad you mentioned those books. That was because I'd wanted to ask you about that, but I didn't want to take up your whole day. So I'm glad you brought it up. What else do you do for fun? You've got this full life, and it just seems like you're going hard every day doing stuff that you're passionate about, that challenges you, that's making your family better. When you're able to just kind of kick back and relax, if you do, what do you do for fun?
So one of the things that kind of surprises people a little bit is that I love Dungeons and Dragons.
I've seen you talk about that. Yeah.
The tabletop role-playing game people, they've got stereotypes about the type of person that typically plays any kind of role-playing games. And, maybe they're true sometimes, but we really enjoy doing that. Wintertime rolls around here when the days are shorter, and we'll sit together as a family and play Dungeons and Dragons. Initially, I thought my kids were too young to do it, but then a friend of mine out in Iowa told me that he's got his kids playing, so we did it, and it's great. And what's cool about it is that we're all playing together instead of one of us individually trying to win. Like when you're playing Monopoly, there's one person trying to beat everybody else at the table. But with Dungeons and Dragons, you're all working together. You have different strengths. There's a lot of cool lessons and parenting that I can do for my kids just through the course of the game. Which is really neat. So that's one of the other things that we do for fun around here is nerd out and play a little Dungeons and Dragons, and we roll our 20-sided dice and we go on adventures, and it's a lot of fun.
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received? That's a hard one because I'm sure you've received a lot. It's
something that no one ever told me, but that I picked up, and the concept of amor fati, love your fate. And I may have pronounced that wrong, but that means that you just, no matter what the situation is, you're like, well, Jocko spelled it out perfectly, when in that short video that he's got where he talks about good.
Oh, I love it. I love it.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I just broke the transmission of my truck. Good. This is an opportunity for me to learn how to fix it and do whatever, because here's the bottom line. You're gonna be doing whatever life throws at you. You're not changing that. Mm-hmm. The only thing that you can control is how you react to it. So you can be a bitch and sit there and whine, oh, wow, it's this day's really hard and I've got all these things going on. Or you can lean into that rock that you're pushing uphill, Sisyphus, and go, okay, cool. This is an opportunity for me to get stronger.
Mm-hmm.
This is an opportunity for me to learn. Every time you're on this side of the dirt, there's an opportunity. Even when so the people could say, hey, I just lost my kid to cancer. How is that good? How is that great? What's the positive aspect of it? Yep, that's horrible. But at least you had the opportunity to have that wonderful child in your life for the time that you did. When I'm gone and people are sitting around talking about me, I don't want them to be sad. I want them to sit around and share moments that we laughed together, that we had, great experience together. And that's how I want to be remembered. I don't want to be remembered with sadness. And then whenever I do lose somebody, instead of focusing on the loss, because that's a given, I need to focus on why I'm a better person and all the great times I spent with that person in my life.
I think that's very wise. And that saying, I don't know how to pronounce it either, but I've actually got that on my bulletin board above my desk, because I think thinking about that, thinking about that you're going to die one day, for me, I mean, I think it may sound depressing to some people, but to me, it's very motivating. No, I appreciate that. And coming from you, like I hear
We're
that.
Getting our stoicism on right now.
I know, we really are. We really are. No, I mean, but I think you're in such a unique, you have such a unique voice and perspective on that, because unlike most people, the majority of the people in the United States, like you come face to face with death a lot, like way more than is even close to normal. And so hearing that from you, I mean, I think it's a powerful message from anybody, but hearing that from you that's a different level. So I appreciate that. I know everybody listening will. Last kind of big question, this podcast is about the West and just about interesting people who are living purpose-driven lives in the West. And it can come at it from any angle. People like you who have served in the military and now are doing other businesses or people who are artists, people who are conservationists, ranchers, the full spectrum. So if you had some kind of parting words of wisdom for the people that listen to this podcast, does anything come to mind?
Be kind. Be kind with yourself. Be kind with your family and your community members and with people. Be kind to the environment. Be kind to everywhere. Add that aspect. Put that cut on everything you're doing. So when you have a filter on anything in your head, have that kindness filter there. It'll make you a better person.
I love it. Well, Jason, man, it's really awesome to talk with you, and thank you for your whole career, and now you're in this post-military career, and I just appreciate that you're willing to put yourself out here like this, on the internet and talking to me and talking to other podcasts, because I'm not joking. It's making the world a better place, and you don't have to be doing that. You don't have to be, putting yourself out there like you do, and same for Iris, and both of y'all are a huge inspiration, and it's a real honor to know both of you.
Oh, thanks so much, Ed. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for everything you're doing out there to, get the words out on conservation and the environment, and how we can all just do better with this country we've got. We're so lucky to live here.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number three, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number four, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way, so head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.